Just starting recording just so we have a record and keep everybody up to date. It's 10:01. I'd like to just wait a couple more minutes. I see attendees. Actually, these people are here. So let me just kind of go through, and if you'll unmute yourself. Am I seeing Matthew Camp? Mr. Camp, is that you're here? I got you.
Yes, I'm here.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for joining. Barbara McGuffey is here. I see. Actually, you don't have to unmute. I see how this works. You're there. Meg Lusteau is here. Thank you, Meg. Megan, Minette, Rob Hellier. Bless you. Sandy Stevens, Sean Massick, Sherry Smith, and Zion. And I see a phone number 201-0871-713-201.
That's Steve Curry. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Curry. Good to have you. Well, then I think we've got plenty of folks here. I don't want to take
the party you are trying to reach is.
And Kirby Lou, I see a light just went off there.
Tone.
Thank
Press
you
the
all.
pound key to end recording.
Not sure. Someone's got a little recording going. We need to mute that. It's kind of coming through. All right, everybody. Good morning. Roman McAllen again here. It's 10:03. And we've gathered for the Conservation District Focus Group meeting. And I'm going to begin to share a screen here. Let's see, slideshow from the beginning over here. And then go here. Now I can't see y'all. I saw Amanda Coleman is here from the staff. I'd asked my staff. I somehow, with the way I'm doing this, am not seeing the faces, but I presume y'all can see a Conservation District Conservation District Focus Group virtual meeting sign up. Does everyone see that?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Roman, it's kind of small on the screen. If you're able to zoom in, that would be great.
I'm not 100. Do you have on the right-hand side kind of a little, the next page coming up?
No, we just see the presentation. It's just not full screen.
Gotcha. Let me try one more time. It may, we've been going through this earlier. It may not work for me in that way. The best I can do is this version here. If I go to the full screen version, the image actually gets smaller for some reason. So if y'all can read that and see it, I'll go to the next slide. It has this morning's agenda, the summary of our last meeting. Is that showing up?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this morning's agenda is to summarize the last meeting. Actually, I'll do the two meetings together from the last two, because I know some members weren't here, and I'd like to respond to some of the questions that were raised in the last meeting and discuss the plan forward. So I'll go through these quickly. In the two meetings back, we talked about things, what we'd like a new tool to do, problems that we're trying to solve, and what limitations we have. We talked about the loss of character and the impact on character of growth, and how development on vacant lots is having an adverse impact. And we talked about the need for transparency and the loss of historic resources. We made a point that we need to be aware of the loss of community that seems to be happening where some areas are being redeveloped, and that affordability is a key thing we'd like to find a way to address. And talked about land banking and tax incentives and the right to purchase, say on properties that might go to auction. We talked about a need for sunset provisions. We talked about the fact that we may have incentives and we may have regulations, and the carrot and stick question. We also heard that in Atlanta, there's a trust fund to assist low-income people with property taxes in areas, conservation areas. Then we talked about possible things that can be regulated, which those will come up again later. Additionally, we heard about the need possibly to look at protection of landscape and trees, and discussions there. So now in the last meeting, it was raised, Dr. Abraham raised the question of the hierarchy of consideration. Where would a conservation district ordinance fall with respect to development? And I will try to, I'm going to try to answer that here, and I don't remember if Director Brown was going to be on at this moment, but in essence, on that question, I have to think about the way the historic district ordinance works. So the historic district ordinance, it doesn't supersede the building code, for example, and so what it does, it affects the building code, and it might be more restrictive, but it can't be can't be less restrictive. And that's the general way that sort of overlay districts or historic districts work. And later we can come back. The other thing that was raised is, what are other cities facing? Zion Escobar asked, can you take a look at what other cities are doing, and what does their neighborhood look like? What are they facing? What's their response? And then there was raised the question of, how can we address the fact that the middle market is being torn down so rapidly? So, responses. One, I want to comment, and I recently sent all of you an email within the last 30 minutes with a link to the National Trust site of the Saving Places Forum. And they had a whole page about how conservation districts are being used, and the fact that they are used to give community-based solutions aimed at protecting an area's distinctive characteristics. They're being used to control tear downs in Dallas, Texas, waterfront development in Annapolis, Maryland, commercial encroachment, which we wouldn't have that because we don't do the zoning in Boise. Conservation district programs are being used to stabilize neighborhoods in Nashville, Tennessee, and increase and preserve the supply of affordable housing in Phoenix, Arizona, and to revitalize close-in neighborhoods, such as in Davis, California. To the question of what other folks are doing, I really only had time to focus in on Dallas, but Dallas has these districts, that's 9, 10, 11, what is that, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 so-called conservation districts. And in these districts, I took a look at the ordinances in them. They regulate lot size, setbacks, lot coverage, building height, FAR, density, stories, number of stories, parking, and architectural styles. And then the review in those districts is only done by staff. And it's worth noting here, the size of the districts. You notice on that bigger picture, that's a pretty big neighborhood, and a couple on the bottom row, but you see one third from the left at the top, which is just a tiny little area. So the size can vary. But I wanted to focus in to Zion's question, what are they facing? So this is the North Cliff Conservation District and its boundaries. And I was looking at the ordinance. The reason they established it, the purpose they said, was to provide a means for conserving that neighborhood and to protect and enhance its significant architectural cultural attributes. The plan, they also had a conceptual plan for the district, which was part of the ordinance that established it. And it was that the plan should reflect the history of this district and illustrate its architectural styles and show locations of contributing and non-contributing buildings. And that's part of it. Now, what are they facing? I really focused on districts that I thought were like the kinds of districts that we are seeing in Houston. So here are some of the neighborhood photographs. Upper left-hand corner, a personal residence that, in my opinion, looks like an owner-occupied by the amount of work going on, but it's certainly not high socioeconomic means. A church on the lower right, and then a more fancier neighborhood house in that neighborhood. Here are some of the regulations in that same district laid out: height, stories, lot coverage, things like that. And here you see the impact of that. The house on the right is a sort of a one-story Tudor style house, right? And the house on the left is clearly a new house. And I don't know with certainty, but I would guess the way that garage is pulled so far back, and then the front porch, that the conservation district had an impact on how that new development looked. This is in that neighborhood as well. And you kind of see this in some of the neighborhoods we've talked about: Emancipation Avenue, Freedmanstown, Independence Heights, Fifth Ward. So here's another district. I looked just more photos from another district. This is the Page Avenue Conservation District, and notice the very small boundaries that they were dealing with. And here again, this first image, I'm looking at what I have to think would be the impact again of the district. Someone was repairing that porch, and the choice to put that cedar shingle in there, and with the very limited work done, it tells for me that that's the impact of a preservation consultant or staff member stepping in and giving a hint as to how to treat that building. Here's another house in that neighborhood, another house in that neighborhood, another house that looks very familiar to the types of houses we see in the neighborhoods we are thinking about. And here we see the adverse impact, I believe, that maybe, again, I'm just assuming this may have been the middle structure, which is a very classic CDBG low-income housing building built that you see get built in low-income neighborhoods. But without any regulation, what did they do wrong? They didn't follow the prevailing setback. They covered half the front yard with concrete. And so this is the kind of thing, if you did have some minimal regulation or direction, you could control, because I believe that kind of work lowers the value of the neighborhood. Conservation District number 7 at Bishop and 8th, in its conceptual plan, none of the regulations I saw in Dallas addressed demolition, which I found interesting, but I didn't read them all. But it did mention demolition in the conceptual plan here, where it's talking about the proposed National Register district in Oak Cliff, which I believe is now a National Register district, because this says that it was nominated in July 1990. And then the highlighted portion, it says it's important to note about demolition. It comes in here. The structures within the district retain their existing form and character, and this designation to be awarded and retained. I missed the word. That's the only reference to demolition in it. They need to retain the structures. And the purpose there was to provide a means for conserving the Bishop 8th Street neighborhood and protect and enhance its significant architectural and cultural. So what does that neighborhood look like? Well, this is what you see over there right now. Houses that are holding on in that case. And then houses that look a lot like, again, our neighborhoods, where they've been altered, not exactly the way we'd like to see. Here's a few more from the neighborhood. Here's what some of the businesses in the neighborhood. This is a superfood cafe in the neighborhood of Bishop and 8th. And here's a restaurant in that neighborhood, Fine Pies for Fine Folk in that neighborhood. So last time Dr. Abraham asked about a matrix, and I didn't make one yet about all the ways, all the cities, that what they're up to. But this, to me, this image is what we're talking about. In the middle, we're talking about conservation districts, and I think there are 4 key areas that this focus group or task force is looking at. Upper left would be the regulatory options. Height, mass, set. These are just options that a neighborhood, that the citizens in a neighborhood put forth an application for a civic district, a conservation district, might want to regulate. Height, mass, setbacks, demolitions, density, lot coverage, parking, FAR, impervious surface, trees, and all of this may come in the form of non-binding consultation with staff, or set standards, and up to guidelines, depending on what that specific neighborhood wanted. On the upper right, we have the question for this task force is, do we care what size they are? For me, 2 or more works. 2 or more lots works. I don't think there should be a limit, because I could imagine a time when somebody would want to protect something small. Implementation, this is a big question for us, and that is, for me, it seems like the initiation process is probably a lot like the one we currently have for historic districts, but with lower buy-in needed. And that lower buy-in would probably be would be needed. So we have higher buy-in needed for the historic districts because we have stricter regulations. And then also with regard to that, the question of, do you sunset it? And then on the lower right, incentives. And I believe from all I've heard from all you guys, everybody, everything that y'all have talked about, it just sounds like we need to allow for the greatest flexibility possible for a given area to address all the things that have been raised. This slide I left in here, and this really gets to questions for the neighborhoods that adopt as conservation district. I think all of these questions really don't have to be addressed by this task force, but that this task force has to decide, are we going to give them that option? I mean, do we recommend that should the city allow for conservation districts, that they allow people to address the size, minimum and maximum of the area, overlap with other districts, and what's the relationship to other programs, and what sorts of incentives and requirements, and can an owner opt out, and who applies. So we got lots of time for discussion, but I'll just tell you that it seems to me that the goal for me would be to come back to you next time with a narrative that would go off, that says for the drafting of it, really be a narrative to send back to the Livable Places main committee. And that narrative should talk about this potential sizes, relationship to other districts, a list of what could be regulated, and all of the things that you see here in this diagram. And let me just see if I have any other. Yeah, so that's about it. So that I have to present in this way. Have I prompted any thoughts? What I would like to hear from the task force members.
This is Zion Escobar from Freedmanstown Conservancy.
Yeah.
You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Roman, thank you so much for this information. It was short and sweet, but it was actually very helpful. And I think it it satisfies kind of a question that Freedmanstown was having. That we didn't want to be lumped in and have a discussion with, every city, every neighborhood, in Houston questioning this for themselves, but there are just certain small spaces that could pursue this, that it's not some kind of large scale impact or disadvantage to anyone else, or, something that would harm development or the development community. So I appreciate you going through this with a lens of kind of attention to a specific neighborhood, and that you would adopt based off of the specific needs of a neighborhood, because the Heights versus Third Ward versus Fourth Ward versus Fifth Ward even all have very distinct needs and very distinct histories that would need to be considered in this matrix. The answer to how the matrix fits together is different for all the neighborhoods. So I'm very, very appreciative of that approach. And that's all.
Thank you, Zion. Man, any other thoughts? Don't forget, if you're on a phone, you've got to press *6 to unmute, or if you want to talk at all, to unmute your microphone.
Hey, good morning, Roman. This is Peter Friedman with Agape Homes CDC. When you mentioned the size of the districts, the minimum size as well, maximum size, as we look at that, is this something we want with 4 houses and on a block trying to implement, or is this something we want to have a minimum size for as well?
If people think that there's if this task force feels that there's a cause for concern for having one too small, I'd like, let's hear it. I think that in my work as a preservation officer in 2 other cities, I have been approached by sometimes just a block face of people, a person who says, gosh, I'm okay right here in my block. I don't want my block to change. I'm okay if the neighborhood looks a little different down the street. But if you look at my block here, I have, and the one that comes to mind was all post-war uh, traditional housing of a small scale on a large lot with, and it had a lot of mature trees. And this individual said, I just don't want to see this change. And I think all my neighbors agree that we don't want to see it change. So, that would have been 5 or 6 houses, I guess. So, and at the same time, we have irregular blocks that could happen that might only have a few lots on them. So my inclination would be to just have it could be it could be two lots or 3. I mean, maybe whatever, somewhere in that. That's where I'll be. That doesn't have a low limit can go pretty low. That's on it, but on the same time, I actually kind of think about going the other direction can get out of control. The city of Houston, of course, we have the Glenbrook Valley subdivision. That's a historic district with, I think, around 1,200 homes. And I think we have to be very careful with creating a district like that, because managing it, which I don't even like that word, but being useful to the citizens of a neighborhood of that size with the tools of preservation gets difficult. It's got to be. So that's where I think the individuality, the option to create a district, and if the neighborhood wants it and they have the support, and maybe this gets into what's the minimum percentage of buy-in that you need to get. Is it back to 50, 51%, or one more than 50%, or is it less? And is that a requirement at all? I don't want to leave that out. I think our preservation ordinance was recently challenged in court. We don't know how that's going to play out, but regardless, we're introducing legislation this session to protect the city of Houston's ability to make historic neighborhoods, which seems crazy, but we might have to do that since we don't have zoning, and that seems to be the issue. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but given that if we can survive in that way, then I think that creating a district, even on a larger scale, works. We just have to be sure that it's helpful to the citizens, and that's where the individuality comes into play. I guess if you have a really large one, but your regulation is, you might decide that they don't have to, that there's a non-binding consultation, for example, with staff, so that projects can move forward. Again, it's that individuality comes into play. I think that impacts the size, if that makes any sense.
Thanks, Roman. I definitely understand where you're coming from there. I'm looking at this from a perspective of we are the affordable home builders, and have this abused in a way where a neighborhood uses a 51% vote to basically stop different type of building that they do not want in there, that is beneficial for the community or for Houston at large. I'm concerned about the possible abuses, not the route you're talking about, where it is a block that has a historical or conservation value, but more it's being used to kind of stop different construction or different types of building.
Right, like so abuse. I'm thinking, like, so if you have a neighborhood that's well organized, usually you find that kind of in more upper income neighborhoods, but that they may say, well, we're not going to have that in our neighborhood. I mean, I'm not sure if that's what you're thinking of, but I do see that as a problem, that people could utilize it, and then we know that affordable housing works best when it's interspersed throughout the city. I'm I don't know if there's consensus here on this task force with that, but that's what I understand to be the case. So now, when your concern there is that because if you were building multiple units, for example, or the building form, is there a way? Remember, because this would only be addressing, well, whatever tools, maybe is there a tool we could choose not to put in the regulation options, which would alleviate that concern of yours?
I'm not really sure exactly what tool we could implement that would protect that, but let me give you an example here. In the neighborhood we're in, it's a greater OST South Union area. It's kind of south of the 3rd Ward. We have a lot of these new homes that are coming in here. They're the 0 lot line, townhouse looking houses. And if we made a minimum size, somebody could come in and buy 4 or 5 lots up and decide that they want to make the conservation district based on these new bills. They control. If somebody had enough lots, they could control the vote on the block. Kind of doing the opposite of what you're talking about, not preserving the history of the block, but creating a barrier for other type of home building to go on. And our neighborhood has 200 empty lots in here. So there's a whole lot of new construction going on, and there's a lot of groups that hold large chunks of land.
I see. That's very different scenario. You're saying, so if you had a minimum lot size and people replat it, then all of a sudden they have a higher number of lots and an undue influence or a imbalanced influence on potential regulation. Is that what you're?
Yeah, exactly. So somebody that's not from the area originally could come in, buy up a certain amount of lots, and then decide this area here is now going to be conserved in this way, this fashion, which could be to their new standards, which would block groups from coming in and doing maybe increased density or affordable housing, or just preserving the original look of the neighborhood that we're trying to accomplish here with these conservation districts.
Yeah, gosh, that just sounds to me that it's got to have a pretty clean solution to avoid that. It's not coming to me now. I don't know if anyone else can put forth an idea, but
is there a variance process or a way to opt out? Like, I know the Walkable Places Committee dealt with this, where they had, what if they didn't want to do some of the restrictions or things that the new walkable ordinance was going to do, because it might impact how they develop. Is there a option to say, well, like if someone's going to come in and totally block what would be the preservation of area or the neighborhood, say, well, we want to opt out of that or do a variance process?
That's a good point. I think that kind of gets back to the adoption part of it, right? Maybe, like, for example, when we do historic districts, today in Houston under the current rules, it only takes 10% of the neighborhood to apply. However, you have to have 67% buy-in of the lot owners. And so apparently what has gone on is there's sort of redrawn the lines until you get that work, but that wouldn't satisfy what you're speaking of, Mr. Camp, would it? You were talking about being able to opt out of it. That may be a feature that we choose to have.
Well, it was just kind of speaking to his point of, if somebody comes in and takes control over something and you have no voice, what are your options to opt out? That would be, a process that you could, really truly preserve the character there instead of what this new larger entity had created.
Right. That's a good. I think it's another. I'm glad we're recording this for the reason that the minds of this department also can work. We can work on addressing that. That's one way to do it. It sounds like. Yeah. Go ahead, Zion. I see your hand there.
Yes, I think that's a great point, and I really appreciate the thinking about both sides of it. And I'm curious if there wouldn't be a standard set of criterion in which you would have to base a conservation district off of, and whether that's history, culture, an event, like there's a specific special event that happened there, and you're trying to preserve a house that has a very specific purpose or something. But could you not essentially filter out people who are trying to create new things that are not attached to something that was part of the original character of the neighborhood, by setting up criteria that filters that out?
Right. Okay. I think the way Dallas addressed this to Mr. Cam, I noticed that they had two within the ordinance for those 15 districts. They had sub-districts within it or subcategories, and there they allowed different things to happen. So to your point, Zion, we talk a lot in preservation about contributing and non-contributing properties. And in Dallas's ordinance, they talk about contributing. They make an inventory of every structure in those districts, and they're labeled contributing or not. You all know that's pretty straightforward. It just means it's contributing if, usually architecturally, it has enough integrity that it fits with the period that neighborhood is considered to have been developed and evolved in. But in the case, what you're referring to, Zion, and for example, the Sugarland 95 or whatever incident or thing that may have happened, something we know occurred at a place and there's nothing left of that. So it gets to maybe, and just having a tool for the neighborhood to be able to decide this. Yes, we care about the architectural styles, and therefore here's contributing buildings and here are not, and new buildings need to look like these. Or you could take it a different way, Mr. Camp, and to Mr. Freeman's point, is you might have an area that's a sub area within the district that has a different set of requirements. Maybe it does allow for a smaller lot size, whereas in this particular area here, it's a larger lot size that's needed. So I think in the toolbox, it's just and that can be called out in the ordinance, that a conservation district may have, I don't want to use the word sub-districts, but maybe compartmentalized or broken up into areas. I guess sub-areas is a better way within the district that could have different requirements. I don't think Tanya DuBose is on here, but up in Independence Heights is feeling a tremendous amount of pressure there, and there are different parts. She drove me around Independence Heights a couple months ago, and there are probably areas there that everyone in the community can agree could be developed differently, a little more densely, for example, or have, let's just say that, a little more densely or in a differentiated way. By the way, I sent 2 articles to y'all. One of them is from the University of Texas School of Architecture's recent issue of Platform magazine, and they did a piece about townhomes in Houston, and it's an interesting read. I think that it misses a couple points. I don't think it really recognized the amount of displacement that has happened, but I think it's worth this task force to read that. And the other thing was about Third Ward in Houston, an article last week, and the comments made in that article get straight to the point of why we're creating this tool. Megan, you have a comment? I see a hand up for Megan.
Yes, thank you. I'm Megan Zigler, and I just had a couple of questions, and I think Zion touched on one, which was the criteria to adopt the conservation district, and just thinking about what that would look like and how it would apply citywide. And then my thoughts thinking about what that criteria looks like and knowing just a little bit about historic preservation, very little. I know that a district has to also meet certain criteria. And I don't can't remember if it's, 5 of 12 things listed or 7 of 12 things listed, but how would, and that led me thinking about minimum building lines, minimum lot sizes. And it seems to me that a lot of these districts will have these same tools. And I just want to put out there that how are we going to, I guess, regulate? How are we, these, all of these are wonderful tools for neighborhoods, but how do they not, you opt out of, you could opt out of, I heard, or an idea, a conservative district, but you're in a minimum lot size. I just want to make sure that the department and we're all thinking about how all of these tools work together.
Yes. So I pulled up the criteria for designations. I'd like to please stay with this thought, Megan. I need to figure out I don't know exactly what so the criteria for designation for Houston, it's funny because I think we use the same criteria for district creation. Yeah, we do. So whether a building, structure, object, site, or area possesses character, interest, or value as a visible reminder of the development, heritage, and cultural and ethnic diversity of the city, state, or nation. That's one. I'm going to pick 3 real quick. Whether the building or structure or the buildings or structures within the area exemplify a particular architectural style or building type important to the city. And 7, whether specific evidence exists that unique archaeological resources are present. So we have that kind of criteria, Megan, but I didn't follow your thought entirely.
Right, no, which I think, to me, that kind of criteria goes so hand in hand with these conservative districts. That is that what we're trying to pull from? The massing, the height, the history. I mean, it seems like we've got a lot of good language right there. I know that there's a difference, obviously, between the preservation district and a conservative district, but is the basic need of it already right there for us? And can we pull from there?
Okay, I think I have your answer. So what I believe this focus group's goal, and the goal of that I see for it, is to be able just to make a little tool in our city ordinance that is flexible and useful for the neighborhood and the community, that puts forth for one to do. And then in that, Megan, seems to me they could choose what is important in that neighborhood will dictate that or determine that. Zion was mentioning the different scenarios which some area might be of importance. But I see this criteria. So the criteria for adoption, I see where we're headed here. Yes, I think you would pull from this criteria. I think that it is almost the same length. If I take these 8 choices here, I'll choose one more. Whether the building, structure, object, or site has value as a significant element of community sentiment or public pride. So that's a pretty, that's a highly subjective thing, but we know it when we see it. I mean, when I drive in Independence Heights and I see the pride which is expressed throughout the neighborhood in various ways, that's what this is about, right? So they just need, the criteria bar should be flexible, as this bar has been since 1965. The bar for the designation of local, state, and national landmarks has always been worded like this. It's worded so that people can choose what's important to them. And so you might have a schoolhouse where the first African-American who worked at the Postal Service lived. I mean, you might have a little house, I'm sorry, I said schoolhouse. You might have a small house, or where the first Hispanic to work for Metro lived, and that matters to that neighborhood. That house will not maybe be eligible for listing on the National Register, and it may not even make the state registered Texas landmark, but it might matter right here to the city of Houston and to that neighborhood. And so I think it's the same way with the conservation districts. It's just a tool we want to put out there, because the historic district tool doesn't work. It doesn't work in areas that have been decimated by redevelopment, or that do, for various reasons, have lost resources. We know that in the 1950s and 60s, HUD money was used in the quote urban renewal way to demolish block after block and many houses. That's why you look at Northeast Houston on the satellite and you see all those empty lots. That didn't just happen. Most of that was done with federal money. So, you know, I think that the criteria, I don't know if I'm getting way off the cuff, so I'll stop. Did you have anything else to say about that, Megan?
No, I think it's, and I didn't think I even had a clear question. It's really just conversation. And so I appreciate what you stated. It's, yeah, how is it exactly just that we're thinking of the differences in how a conservation district can work, where I think we've all seen that the historic preservation has been a struggle here in Houston, and as well as how it is a great tool, but the minimum lot size and the minimum building lines for neighborhoods have been difficult to get. And, you know, I think just finding truly something that works and maybe learning from our past history with those tools, or how we can, you know, how we can overlap with them to make stronger districts. Yeah,
I really encourage you to read that Third Ward article. I don't know who wrote it at the Houston Chronicle, but it was, again, I made it into a PDF and I put it in that email because I think it just really, for me, it struck a chord about why we were trying to do this. But that's the difference. I mean, I don't think I finished the thought that the historic district regulations don't work because you need contiguous historic resources. You know, you have to have enough contiguous historic resources in a place. And then you have that higher bar of regulation, which I mean, I don't hear really from what we do here in our office with our 22 districts, almost all of them, people don't have a problem meeting the regulations. And I, for the most part, hear that most people appreciate them. And we get calls when people are doing work without a permit because they don't want to see historic windows ripped out of a 1930s bungalow when practically every house. And if you drive to Houston Heights today, it's still just striking to me how much architectural integrity is there. Most of the historic windows are there. And that's true of a lot of the other neighborhoods. So that has worked, but here, this tool is to try to answer other things. And if you saw that map from Dallas where there's just all those different districts where they're protecting. And it seems to me, inadvertently, what Dallas did is protect affordability. As I showed you a lot of those pictures there, I noticed that we don't have this, and I don't want to touch on that Z word or anything, but I noticed in the wording of those ordinances, it says this must stay. You can't put more units. It basically was talking about minimum lot size. And that's why in those pictures I shared, there were so many of those pretty modest dwellings that are still in those neighborhoods. And I think intentionally or not, they did help to keep the affordable middle in place there. And maybe we can learn, that's why I read into some of that. Any other thoughts? I see a dot up here, red dot. I don't know what it means. I think it just means someone joined. No, there's a hand. It's just Megan. You got your hand up there, I think, still. Well, folks, I mean, so going again forward, my thinking was, so let's review what we discussed. So what I'm saying is that conservation districts, four areas that matter is when we draft or when we recommend forward something, what regulatory options should we say that communities can choose from? Are y'all okay with that? We might say height, mass, setback, demolitions, and I mean they're demolitions of contributing significant structures, density, lot coverage, parking, FAR, impervious surface, trees, and yes.
Would it be helpful to show a slide with all of the points that we've discussed, the ones that you're mentioning now, so that we have a visual as you're going through them?
I don't have, I think the slide, I know which slide you're thinking of, and I don't think I can get to it quickly. But I took the list and put that list. Sorry, go ahead.
If you need to, just let me know. I can see if I can pull it up quickly.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yes, please. Yes, please.
Okay.
And so and I'll chat while that comes up. So that's the regulatory side, and then the size question. And on the incentive side, I think we just draft language in here that for a future district, that it have the ability to put incentives in there, in their, and that just with as much flexibility as I state here as possible. So here's that list. Thank you, Lynn. These are things we've talked about. Well, I don't think impervious cover came up too much before, but I had it in my list too. Dallas had it in its list. Land use, we can't do, right? That's zoning, I believe, if I understand it correctly. And so this list goes a little far because retaining walls aren't common in Houston. So this, again, I guess what you would say when you look at a list like this, yes, you could have a neighborhood, and maybe it's whatever neighborhood, in some neighborhoods that would like to pass something that has information about these things in it. But I don't think our concern is any of this. I think we just want to pass or ask that we get an ordinance that allows flexibility for any given neighborhood or citizens to protect their neighborhood in that way. So going back, you mind if I take the screen back, Lynn? I think you might be muted. Oh. Lynn, are you muted?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Roman.
Okay. Let's see. Going back to, I think I need to be here. Does that work? Are you all seeing the goal screen?
We are seeing it. It's just too small, Roman.
Oh, too small? Okay, I know the cure for that. I think I have to just share from the right screen. How about this one? A little bigger now? Feel like one of those optometrists, A or B or C. But you see the goal screen now?
Yes, it's larger now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just, if everyone's okay, it's 10 to 11, and we had it scheduled, I think we scheduled at 11:30, but my thing would be to come back to you based on, and we've recorded this meeting today to carefully go over the things brought up by Mr. Camp and Mr. Friedman and Zion and all of you, but to come back with a narrative that would kind of point by point list these categories and what could go into a potential conservation district ordinance. And I say that hesitantly. I've drafted these ordinances and edited them. The Denton ordinance on conservation I wrote, Brownsville ordinance, all those ordinances. But we still, here at the city, we take it to our legal department and we work together to get something which we would take to the Livable Places Commission. It seems to me we just want the tool to be flexible enough to address the objectives and the concerns that you all have raised. And that can be maybe part of that narrative as well. How does that sound? Does that work for all you guys and everybody?
Sounds good.
Roman, you had also mentioned about incentives. I don't, or at least I think that's important to perhaps have a bullet point so that it's not just looked at as a stick, but there's also a carrot. I mean, just having some kind of language as part of the goals.
Yes, absolutely. So this going stepping back, I see that what we bring forth would kind of have these 4 categories, and incentives will be there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair Basil. All right, everybody. Any other comments at this time at all?
I mean, this is Minette Basil. I just think this is one of the most important things I've seen in recent memory in terms of planning for our city that we've all tried to tackle together. I think it can just make a huge difference for our neighborhoods. And as Zion and others pointed out, protect affordable housing as well, and help set policy for other things coming after. So thank you for your good leadership on this, and to everyone on this group.
Thank you, Chair Basil. Any other comments? Okay, well, seeing none, I've left my email there, and if you think of anything later, please call or email me. And I really look forward to all of us one day celebrating the adoption in Houston of a conservation district, custom made for that neighborhood. I'd be happy. Can't wait to shake y'all's hand later this year. Thank you very much.
Sorry to add one more comment. I see that in the chat room, there's a number of comments about commercial buildings and which would not necessarily meet the criteria of a standard lot size and so on. So something to consider how we preserve the commercial building stock along certain streets and as part of this.
Chair Basil.
Thank you. I forgot to ask the question about, are we really gearing this more towards residential, or are we factoring commercial into this?
Okay, yeah, I see that. It seems to me that the commercial market is primarily a problem with small business credit and not something that can be fixed with municipal ordinances. Okay, I appreciate. I hadn't read through here. You guys have, I appreciate all these, and I think Mr. Camp, the answer there, I guess, would be when the only, for example, Emancipation Avenue. It had a unique commercial characteristics there between. Like around North McGregor up to up to downtown, for example. So you've got commercial buildings that have been used commercially in there. I think the way, from what I'm gathering, and then even in Freedmanstown, there are little structures. There's a barber shop that the Museum Conservancy preserved, a tiny barber shop. So Independence Heights has its main street. So I think it just depends on those individual areas in terms of what's going to, we're not going to say you can't. A barbershop might become a home, or a home might become a cafe. I don't think it has impact that way. It's just it's up to that neighborhood. I don't know if I'm answering what you're thinking about. Mr. Camp, is that what you were thinking?
Yeah. Well, you get so many blocks or areas that have commercial mixed in, and how do you work that overlay district or conservation district in with those commercial owners? Are they automatically exempt, or how does that work?
I think they'd just be like any other person who owns a property in there. Like as we were discussing, opting out or not, but I try to keep it free will. I think of Fifth Ward and areas of town, it just depends on. They could be in it. In other words, the district. If you have a district of 2 or 3 blocks, it might have within it commercial properties, but it's not. To me, it's about aesthetics, right? Maybe it's but if we put this set of tools, going back to the list that Lynn had up, if people have the option to impact height, mass, setback, all these things, those would apply to anything in there, of course. Still don't think I'm understanding what you meant, though.
No, it's okay. I think you got it.
Okay. Well, and let me just double check. So that's what I saw in the chat. Make sure there's nothing else here. Someone shared Mr. Camp shared a Strong Towns article in the chat. There's a missing middle for commercial spaces too. That's what you're getting at. Okay, the missing middle for commercial space. Of course, critical. Now I see what you meant. Yes. It would have an impact because you might end up saving structures that can be rehabilitated or repurposed for a different use. I think it has a positive impact. That, and I'll read this article. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I see the person at 3877 light up there. I just want to make sure that you don't need to unmute. Someone at 713-961-3877. But you're okay. *6 to unmute. All right. It's 10:56. Thank you all incredibly. And I'll see you on the next meeting. If you please, I'll send you another, however I think my free usage of the doodle polling, my free usage is worn out. So I'll find another way to poll you on a meeting time. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.